Hello, everybody. I think that is everybody. We got a couple more coming in. All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Carrie. I work with the Andersons events team, and we are just so excited to have you guys here tonight to celebrate this amazing new novel by Lev Grossman. And Lev, this is your first book for kids, right? I want to make sure
my first book for kids.
Yeah.
That's
Just want to
right.
make sure I had it right before I put it out there. You guys, of course, know Lev. He is a New York Times bestselling author of the Magician's Trilogy, which is super popular, and now he has taken aim at middle grade audiences with The Silver Arrow, which luckily, hold on, I'm admitting one more person. Luckily, those of us at Anderson's, we get kind of lucky sometimes, and we get sneak peeks at books before they come out. And this was one of the ones that we did get a sneak peek at, and we all absolutely love it. So we're really excited to share it today. And it came out into the world today, correct?
No, it has been out in the world for a week, but it is still emerging into the world.
Okay. So it is new into the world no matter what. And it is fantastic. And I'm really excited that you guys are going to get a chance to finally read it. I will be posting, for those of you who have not yet purchased the book, I will be posting a link to be able to purchase the book through us in the chat. And feel free at any point to go ahead and check that out. You can purchase books to be shipped to you or to be picked up in either one of our stores. Once again, I just want to thank you so much for being here. Anderson's has been selling books independently since 1875, believe it or not. This is definitely a very challenging and trying time, but we actually survived the Spanish flu of 1918, and we are going to survive this pandemic as well. We are always looking for new ways to make it work in this crazy world we're living in right now. That said, we are building this virtual events landscape from the ground up. So I put my email address there at the top. I just want to point it out really quickly. If any of you guys have feedback about the format of this event, the way the ticketing went, what you'd like to see more in events, what you think went well, what you've seen at other places that you like that they do, please let us know. Don't be afraid to shoot me an email. I really want to hear from you guys and know what's working so that we can continue to build a good events program, because I think we are going to be doing virtual events for quite a while. So with that said, I'm actually going to go ahead and turn the welcome, Lev. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for just continuing to make it work in this incredibly weird and challenging time that we are in. I also am building my own virtual landscape, which tonight seems to include an enormous shiny spot on top of my head, and I apologize for that. I don't know if there's any way to get rid of it short of my putting on a hat. And I'm not going to put on a hat because that seems, I don't know, it seems like not quite the right thing. I apologize also for this peacock colored blazer which I'm wearing, which my wife tells me I ought not to wear after Labor Day because it's a summer blazer, but I'm so fond of it, and frankly I didn't get to wear it that much this summer, so I've got it on now. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about The Silver Arrow. This is, as came up, my first book for children. I have written 5 novels for adults. I've written a lot of things. I wrote journalism for 20 years. I wrote a failed dissertation. I wrote a failed screenplay, and also a successful screenplay. Or so it's successful so far. We'll see how it does. And now I've written a book for children, which I know seems, it's always weird when a writer changes genres or changes modes. For a long time, people, if anybody knew who I was, it was because I was the book critic for Time magazine, and then I wrote a novel, and everybody thought that was very weird. In fact, I always thought of myself as a novelist who happened to accidentally become a critic. And now I have gone from being a novelist for adults to somebody who's writing books for children, which again, it seems weird. People tend to stay in one or the other. Even Roald Dahl, who was, one of my main inspirations for this book, he wrote for adults and children, but he really only ever was known as a children's writer. He wasn't that successful as a writer for adults. So it may seem odd. It doesn't seem odd to me because I'm a dad. I have three kids. I spend a lot more time being a dad than I do being a writer, just in the way of things, especially in pandemic land when I spend most of my time taking care of my kids. So it made sense to me. It seemed very logical to me to write a book for children. But I realized from the outside, it might seem weird. But when, of course, when you have kids, you tell them a lot of stories. I tell my kids a lot of stories, usually just to make them fall asleep or just make them stop hitting each other, which happens a lot. And it was only a couple years ago that I decided that I felt confident enough as someone who, as a storyteller for kids, to try writing something down. I wish that I could tell you that The Silver Arrow is my kids' favorite ever story that I ever told them. The Silver Arrow is my children's second favorite story that I ever told them. Their favorite story is one where they're animal superheroes. One of them is a caracal, which is apparently some kind of wildcat that can jump really high, and one of them is a hamster, and they fight Lex Luthor, who is stealing all the gold and silver from the Gotham Mint. But I just could not make a deal with DC Comics about their intellectual property to use Lex Luthor. So instead, we have the Silver Arrow. And I'll talk a little bit about where the Silver Arrow came from. It began with just an image. A lot of novelists describe their process as starting with a single image, and this one started that way. And the image was just of a young girl on a train, a steam train, and she's kind of trundling through this nighttime landscape, and she's looking out the window of a cozy sleeping car, and the train is empty except for her. And it was just that. And it was an image that I remember thinking of, and it sort of tugged at my heart a little bit. And I thought, I wonder if that image is going to stay with me, and it did. And if the farthest back I can kind of trace it is to one of the T.S. Eliot's Practical Cats poems, which is the one called about Skimbleshanks, the railway cat, which I realize I don't feel like he's one of the A-list practical cats necessarily. I feel like there are a lot better known practical cats than Skimbleshanks. But Skimbleshanks, the railway cat, was always my favorite. And there's one stanza in that poem about the kind of cozy sleeping car that you have on Skimbleshanks' train. And I'll read you a few lines from it. Oh, it's very pleasant when you found your little den with your name written up on the door. As it is in the Silver Arrow, they have their names on the door. And the berth is very neat with a newly folded sheet, and there's not a speck of dust on the floor. There is every sort of light. You can make it dark or bright. There's a handle that you turn to make a breeze. It's a funny little basin you're supposed to wash your face in, and a crank to shut the window if you sneeze. As a child, I was always so taken with that image of this place that was cozy and snug, and you were just sort of you were warm and safe there, but at the same time you were off on a journey going somewhere else, and you could look out the window and see the landscape rolling by. Since that time, I've become an adult, and I have actually traveled on a sleeper car. And I can tell you, I don't know if you were here with me, I would ask you to raise your hands if you've ever been on a sleeper car overnight. I have been on a sleeper car overnight twice, and I can tell you, on those two nights, I got a total of about 0 minutes of sleep because sleeper cars are so unbelievably uncomfortable. When I was a journalist, one of my assignments, I was sent to England to interview John le Carré, the famous spy novelist who was one of my favorite authors. And I saw that I took a flight over to London, and then it got in late at night, and then I would get on a sleeper train to go down to Penzance, which is at the tip of Cornwall, which I didn't know was a real place. I thought it was a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta, but Penzance is a real place, and John le Carré lives there. And I thought how great it would be I could take a sleeper car just like Skimbleshanks. And I can tell you, it was unbelievably uncomfortable. It was freezing cold. The bed was like a sort of slab of iron, and you had like this tiny sheet that went over you. And when you lay down, your head was like 2 feet above the tracks, and you just hear this like jackhammer sound of the wheels of the train going over the ties. And I did not sleep a single wink. And I remember showing up to John le Carré's house this author who I'd been waiting my whole life to meet, and I was a complete zombie. And I remember saying, John le Carré, his name is David, actually, that's a pen name. I said, David, do you have a spare room because I need to go lie down? Which is not how I imagined my first meeting with John le Carré, but that's how it went down. But the sleeper car in the Silver Hour is much, 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 much nicer than that. So I had this image of this girl in this cozy Skimble Shanksian sleeper car. And I sort of hung around with that for a while. And after a while, I started thinking about, where is the train going? What is this train? What stations does it serve? And then, after a while, I came upon another image, which was this picture in my head of a group of animals, and they're standing at the station. They're waiting on the platform of this old-fashioned train station, and it's in the middle of a forest, and there's no streets or roads or anything around, just this train station. And all the animals are sitting there very solemnly, and each one of them has a ticket in its mouth or in its beak, and they're just waiting for this train with this girl on it to arrive. And that's when it started to get really interesting, because I started to ask myself, what would they say to each other? What would the girl have to say to these animals, and what would the animals have to say to the girl? And I'm telling the story to my kids as I'm sort of going along and kind of workshopping it. And I realized that the conversation that this girl and the animals were going to have, it would have to be very different from the kinds of conversations I think kids have had with talking animals in the past. You think about the Pevensies when they went into Narnia and they met Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. Mr. and Mrs. Beaver are delighted to see the Pevensies. The Pevensies have come to save the world. They are the saviors, and everything is going to be okay now that the humans are here. I don't think that's how animals would see, how a talking animal would see a human now. I think that for the animals, humans are kind of a mixed bag at best. For the animals, they're living in what amounts to a post-apocalyptic world that has been utterly changed by humans. And then if a human shows up and they have a chance to talk to the human, that conversation, it would be a very different kind of conversation from the one that happens in Narnia. And I found that very interesting, because to the humans, to the girl, she would feel like a hero of this story, this adventure she's going on. But to the animals, she would be the villain. And there would have to be a negotiation about that. And I thought that was very interesting and a good start to a novel. And so I wrote it, and that's what became The Silver Arrow. And I want to say that I didn't find it easy. I thought that I would find it easy. When I started it with a feeling which I now realize was what they used to call in high school English class hubris, a fatal pride, because I was used to writing for adults, and a novel for adults, or my novels for adults anyway, would run about 145,000 words. When you are a writer, you quickly stop thinking in terms of pages, and you think about how many words are in a book. The Magician's books each had about 145,000 words in them. And then I Googled Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I discovered the fact that Charlie and the Chocolate Factory only had 35,000 words in it. And I don't know what 35,000 divided by 145,000 is, but it seemed like a relatively small fraction, and it seemed like this could be the kind of thing that I would knock out in about 6 weeks and then keep on going. It wasn't like that. It was actually very challenging. Children are... they are a very sophisticated audience, and they are very smart. One can forget, even as a parent, that children are actually as smart as adults. They don't know a lot of the things that adults do, but they are very smart, and they pay very close attention when you are telling them a story. And they notice if you make a mistake in your continuity, and if you get your facts wrong. They notice that if you are having trouble making up your mind about something, or if you are doubting yourself, or if you are feeling too enamored with your own prose, they get that immediately, and they've lost their attention, and off they go, and they're playing with Legos or a video game. If you can keep their attention, I think children's attention is underrated. Children, when they read, they are so caught up in their stories. we think of children as distracted or and having trouble paying attention to things. When they are paying attention, that attention is so complete and so total, and so rewarding as a writer. They just invest emotionally, completely in stories that they like. That when you have them all the way, and it's a great feeling. But it's easy. It's very, very easy to lose them. I also had to figure out a lot about what you leave out and what you put into a children's story. I rapidly figured out that children love information. There is virtually no amount of facts about the natural world that they cannot absorb. And they are enormously memorious. They just remember everything. And they have such powerful emotions. Just like they are as smart as adults, they have the same emotions that adults have. They are enraged and joyful and envious and everything else. Their emotions are so big, and you don't put, as it turns out, child-sized emotions into books. I also I have this parental impulse to shield children from some of the painful realities of the world. And you think about, when you're writing, you think about, well, you don't want to have a lot of violence in your book, and, or cruelty, or, things that are just too dark. And you tend to forget, you can forget for a little bit, that children know a lot about cruelty. Children, they have been to the playground, they have been to recess, and they know that there is a lot of cruelty in the world. And if you leave it out, then they feel like you're lying to them. And you are. You're airbrushing over difficult realities that they know about. They know are there, and they're looking for them, and they're waiting for them. There's an example would be, there's a character in The Silver Arrow who is a snake. He is an Eastern green mamba, and I'm so enamored of Eastern green mambas that I'm going to attempt to share my screen with you to show you a picture of a mamba. I have never tried to share my screen with anybody, so this is an actual first. And let's see how it goes. I'm going to share. Here it goes. It says on my screen that I'm sharing a screen with you, so you may be able to see a picture of a green snake. I don't like to anthropomorphize animals. I like to keep them very animal-y, but it's hard not to anthropomorphize the green mamba because they look so much like people. They look like they have these enormous mouths, which are a little bit smiley, and then if they get very angry, their mouth opens up a little bit, and they look like a Muppet. It's hard not to fall in love with the green mamba and think of them like like they have an actual personality. So I had a green mamba in the book. And of course, mambas are incredibly venomous. They're among the most venomous creatures in the world. They're also very fast. This is a disturbing fact about mambas. They are among the fastest snakes in the world. So not only do you die if they bite you, but if you see one and it's coming after you, you're not going to outrun it. Depressing fact, but true. And at first I sort of shilly-shallied around the venomousness of the green mamba. I could sense that I was losing my children's attention. And I suddenly realized I don't need to shilly-shally around it. I need to double down on it, because they actually really want to know what happens to you if a mamba bites you, which is terrible things. Your flesh starts to rot, and you become dizzy, and you have trouble breathing, and you have heart palpitations, and a whole bunch of other bad things happen, and then quite often you die. But it was an important lesson for me about cruelty, and it's another thing that if I'd been paying more attention to Roald Dahl, I would have known, because he has a lot of cruelty in his books, and I think it's one of the things that children recognize as authentic about them. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the book is about, because I haven't done that yet, and I really want to. The Silver Arrow is about a girl named Kate who has a mysterious uncle whose name is Uncle Herbert. On her 11th birthday, her Uncle Herbert, who she has never met before, but she knows that he's very wealthy, he gives her a present, and the present is a train, and it is not a toy train. It is a real, actual steam train, life-size, made of iron, gigantic, and it just shows up in front of her house one day. And I'm pretty sure she rather would have had Legos than a train, but she doesn't get Legos. She gets a train. And pretty soon, she and her brother Tom discover that the train actually works. And there is a set of mysterious train tracks running through their backyard. And they take the Silver Arrow, which is the name of the train, off down those tracks. And they have an enormous number of complicated adventures. And I'll read you a very short passage from the book, which is the passage when the train shows up for the first time. Kate has written a letter to her Uncle Herbert asking him for a present. And he responds the next day by sending her this train. Kate didn't especially want a train. It's not like she was into trains. It was more of a Tom thing. She has a brother named Tom who's younger. But after all, she hadn't asked for anything specific, and she guessed that her uncle probably didn't have much experience with kids, so Kate tried to be philosophical about these things. What was really surprising, though, was how big it was. I mean, this thing was really big, like too big to send through the mail. It arrived at their house on a specially reinforced double-wide flatbed truck with 28 wheels. It was giant and black and incredibly complicated. In fact, it didn't look like a toy at all. It looked like an actual, real, life-sized steam train. That, Uncle Herbert explained, was because it was one. Uncle Herbert had come to deliver it personally. He was fat, with thinning brown hair and a mild-mannered, round face. He looked like a history teacher or somebody who might take tickets at an amusement park. Kate was so surprised she couldn't think of anything to say. "That is a really big train," was all she came up with. It would have to do. "It's not a whole train," Uncle Herbert said modestly. "Just the engine and a tender. That's the coal car right behind it." "How much does it weigh?" Tom asked. 100 tons, Uncle Herbert said crisply. "What, exactly?" Kate said. "Like it literally weighs exactly 100 tons? Well, no," Uncle Herbert said. "It weighs 102 tons, 102.36. You are right to be suspicious of overly round numbers." "I thought so," said Kate, who was. Kate's father came out of the house, too. "Herbert," he said, "what the blazes is this?" He didn't really say blazes, but you can't put the word that he did say in a book for children. "It's a train," Uncle Herbert said. "Well, I can see that, but what's it doing here? On a truck, so very close to my house." "It's a present for Kate. And Tom, I guess. If she wants to share." He turned to Kate and Tom. "Sharing is important." Uncle Herbert definitely didn't have much experience with kids. "Well, it's a nice gesture," Kate's father said, rubbing his chin. "But couldn't you have just sent her a toy?" "It is a toy." "Well, no, Herbert, it's not a toy. That's a real train." "I suppose," Uncle Herbert said. "But technically, if she's going to play with it, then sort of by definition it's also a toy, if you think about it." Kate's father stopped and thought about it, which was a tactical error. What he probably should have done, Kate thought, was lose his temper and call the police. Her mother didn't have this problem. She came tearing out of the house, yelling, "Herbert, you blazing idiot! What the blaze do you think you're doing? Get this thing out of here! Get off the train!" She said that last part because while all this was going on, Kate and Tom had gotten up onto the flatbed truck and were starting to climb up the sides of the train. They couldn't stop themselves. They reluctantly got off it and retreated to a safe distance, but Kate still couldn't stop looking at it. It was giant and black and complicated with lots of fiddly little bits that obviously did interesting things and a cozy little cab that you could sit in. It looked ominous and fascinating, like a sleeping dinosaur. And the longer you looked at it, the more interesting it got. Stenciled along the side of the tender in small white capital letters were the words, "The Silver Arrow." That was its name. They'd written it with a long, thin arrow sticking through the letters. "Well, it's not even silver," Kate's father said. "It's black." "And what would you do with a silver arrow anyway?" "Hunt werewolves," Kate said. "Obviously." I'm going to stop there because I feel like hunting werewolves, something about that's very Kate. I feel like it says a lot about who she is, that she thinks about hunting werewolves with a silver arrow. I'm going to finish by saying a couple things about trains, which I should really limit myself about because trains, you can't mouth off about steam trains on the internet because, as it turns out, there is always somebody who knows at least 10 times more than you do about steam trains. I will just say that they are a real gift to storytellers. first of all, they're incredibly complicated. We have this sort of funny tendency, or I do, to think of people who lived in the past as being not as clever as us because they didn't have computers and phones and things like that. But actually, they were every bit as smart as us. And what they had were steam trains. And they are so complex. They're like giant iron computers that are powered by steam, and you ride inside them. And it's just unbelievable when you start reading about them, how much thought went into creating them. And I liked the idea of Kate having to master this enormous piece of technology while she was riding inside it. I feel like a lot of childhood these days is about mastering technology, and it would be fun to write a story about it. And the other thing that's amazing about them is that, as I sort of alluded to this earlier, trains, you travel through the world in them, and so you have these wonderful exploring adventures in them, and yet they are also kind of little worlds unto themselves, and you can explore inside them, and there are lots of little weird unexpected things inside the trains that you find, and Kate certainly finds a lot of those. I will give you one piece of advice about steam trains, and that is, and it's a disappointing fact for me to learn, don't turn a steam train upside down. There's a scene in the book where the steam train goes, as it almost inevitably would have to, it goes on a kind of loop-the-loop track, like a roller coaster, and it turns completely upside down. And in order to make my point even more emphatically, I'm going to share my screen again. This is what happens if you turn a steam train upside down, which is that the boiler explodes. Steam train boilers exploded a lot, and you didn't have to turn them upside down to make them explode. You just had to let the water get a little bit too low, and that is what they look like when they explode. Exploded steam train boilers are so fascinating looking that there is a whole genre of photographs of exploded steam trains on the internet, and you can find a great many of them. That's another one of my favorites. There are even still a few more pictures of exploded steam trains. That's what they look like. So that's what you want to avoid when you have your steam train. But I left that out of the book because I found it so disappointing and disturbing. And I will leave you with one fact that I did leave out of the book because I found it so challenging. Kate, on her adventures, she meets a lot of talking animals. And one of the animals that she meets is a pangolin. Pangolins are incredibly fascinating creatures. And I'm fond of saying that they're the only mammals with scales. Somebody pointed out to me the other day that don't anteaters have scales, and aren't they also mammals? So maybe possibly there are two mammals with scales, pangolins and anteaters. I'm a little unclear on that. But there are at most two, and they're often, some species of them are critically endangered. They're very heavily trafficked animals. Anyway, there's a pangolin character in the book, and I love pangolins, but you'll notice about pangolins, if you read too much about them, as I have, that they have very small heads, and also they have very long tongues. Their tongues are as long as their whole body. And after a while, I started to wonder, well, their heads are so tiny, and their tongues are so long, how do they fit that gigantic tongue inside their tiny mouths? And the answer is, they don't. A pangolin's tongue is not anchored inside its mouth. It lives inside its chest, where it is anchored. And when a pangolin is not using its tongue, the tongue goes all the way down inside its chest and coils up there like some horrible pink snake. I found that so disturbing that I did not put it in the book. But that is the truth about pangolins' tongues. But the rest of it, I put in. And as I told and retold the story to my kids, I became more and more aware of how much reality kids are dealing with today, and the fact that this generation, and it sounds glib to say this, and yet, except that it is true, they are facing a challenge that is utterly unlike anything that any generation before them have faced. They have inherited this disaster that is not of their making, and in order to solve it, they are going to have to be very smart and make terrible sacrifices, and they are going to have to think about their place in the world in a way that is wholly new and original, and which our generation has never quite succeeded in doing. And it's an incredible challenge, and I don't know how to help them with that. except to write a story about it. And that's the Silver Arrow. Thank you. That's the end of my talk about the Silver Arrow. And it's my hope that maybe there'll be a few questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to answer them. I think that we're doing them through the chat. Is that right?
Yes. So we do have a couple that have come in. If you guys, anybody out there has any questions, comments, anything at all, please go ahead and put it through the chat, and I am going to pick a few to throw at Lev. That was great. Thank you. I have a coworker I wish was on this tonight because she's obsessed with pangolins, and I cannot wait to tell her that little tidbit because she's never mentioned that about the tongue before, and I'm going to really impress her. So I wish she was here, but I'm also glad she's not so that I can hopefully blow her mind. Okay, so if you have any questions at all, please go through and put them through the chat. And Lev, here, I'll read a couple that we've gotten. Okay, this is from Evelyn. Hey, Lev, in the Silver Arrow, Kate greatly admires Grace Hopper. When you were writing, did you ever consider any other female role models for Kate, or was it always going to be Grace?
Hi, Evelyn. Grace Hopper comes up very early on in the book, and I think that the short answer is I don't think I really considered a lot of other heroines for Kate, except possibly Joan of Arc, who I also admire a lot. But everybody knows who Joan of Arc is, and nobody knows who Grace Hopper is. And very early on, I realized if I do nothing else with this book, I can force more people to know who Grace Hopper is. And Grace Hopper was a very great woman who was an early computer programmer. She was, she was an essential part of the development of the first electronic computers. She was a programmer, and she wrote the first software compiler. And you think about what it must have been like to be Grace Hopper. To be an engineer in a discipline that didn't exist, and in a world that wasn't very interested in female engineers. Nobody, I don't think, probably wanted Grace Hopper to become an engineer, let alone a software engineer, because nobody even knew what that was. And yet she did, and she transformed the entire world. And she became famous, and she became an admiral in the Navy. I believe that there is an aircraft carrier named after her. It's a kind of wonderful story of somebody who was just too strong and too smart to be denied. And I admire Grace Hopper a lot. And I think Kate admires her a lot too.
That's awesome. I love Grace Hopper. Okay, another one we have from S. Royce. She says, I'm curious if you've heard the audio for the book. The narrator is incredible and truly brings your story and characters to life. Thank you for this story. I look forward to putting it into the hands of middle grade readers.
I'm really glad to hear that. The narrator of the book is Simon Vance. That is his name. I don't know how much you know about this. When you write a book, one of the early questions you get asked by your editors is, do you want to read it yourself? And you say no, because if you're me, your voice is nasal and irritating, and your editor says, oh, thank God. And so then they assemble a kind of roster of potential readers, and they record them reading the first chapter, and they have men reading and women reading, and they have American accents and English accents. And then you, the author, get to sit down and listen to them. And if you did a little drama in high school, as I did, and had the experience of going through a lot of unsuccessful auditions, to have people auditioning for you, it's very empowering. It was it was a very healing experience for me, and I really enjoyed it. And I listened to all the readers read, and they were amazing, and they were so much better than I could ever possibly have been. But the one whose voice I fell in love with was Simon Vance's. When I wrote the book, the voice I heard reading it in my head was Stephen Fry's. You can't have Stephen Fry unless you are a very famous, important author like J.K. Rowling. But you can have Simon Vance, who is just as good. And the only thing that I remember, the only piece of direction that I gave to Simon Vance, and I cringed thinking that I ever gave direction to Simon Vance, was that He he read the narration in his wonderful English accent. My mother is English, and so I strongly associate. I have very powerful, positive maternal associations with English accents, and he has just this just lovely round English accent. And then when the characters would talk, he would do it in an American accent. Assuming, I think, that he was, for obvious reasons, that he was carrying out my authorial wishes because I am American, and I would think of my characters, who are at least Kate and Tom are American. You would think they would have American accents. But I remember saying, "Oh, just keep it all in the English accent. Just keep doing the English accent." And I will say as a footnote to that is that I don't know if he did that or not, because I get so self-conscious listening to the audiobook that I don't think I've ever made it more than 20 seconds into an audiobook of one of my works. But I feel in very good hands with Simon Vance.
Okay. And on that note, by the way, I'm going to take a minute to shamelessly plug Libro.fm. If any of you like audiobooks are fantastic. And I tell kids all the time when they come in, like, they count as reading. Please, like, listen to books, read books, whatever format you like, just digest literature. It's awesome. We prefer Libro.fm because it is the first company out there that allows you to actually purchase your audiobooks through your favorite independent bookstore, which we really hope is us. So check it out if you haven't already. I do know the book is on there because actually I have it in my account because I like to listen to an audiobook and read it and pick it up depending where I am. I like having that flexibility. So.
I also, by the way, love this. I love audiobooks. I run every other day, and I hate running so much that the only thing that can compel me to run is that I get to listen to the next chapter of whatever audiobook I have.
That's what I do too. Yeah, it does help.
It does help.
Takes your mind off the pain.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to lump two questions here together. One is from SP, who says, "What age would you recommend this book for?" And I'm going to kind of put that together with a question from Brenda Rogers, who says, "How was it different to write a story aimed at middle grade versus your previous novels, and what were the challenges and advantages?"
What age? My son is 7, and kids are all kids are different. Looking at his reading level, I think it's probably a little difficult for him. So I would say probably 8 and up. But all kids are different. It's supposed to be pitched at that Roald Dahl level. It's supposed to kind of be at that same difficulty as Fantastic Mr. Fox or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Starting at 8 or 9, maybe. And it was right. It's hard to distinguish the difficulty of writing a middle grade novel from the difficulty of writing all novels. I've never met a novelist who doesn't just love to whine about how challenging writing novels is, and I am no different. So this was, it was difficult. It's interesting that you, when you're structuring your book, if it's a middle grade book, if it's an adult book, you have a lot of different storylines and you sort of intertwine them in this sort of artistic way. In a middle grade book, you really only get 2 plots. You get a sort of a main A plot, and then you'll get maybe a secondary plot. And I don't really think you get a third plot. You only get 2 plots. So structurally, you have to do a lot with a little. You also have to get it off to a really raring start. And I think now, even more than it used to be. Go back and read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And ask yourself, how long does it take before Charlie finds the golden ticket? I may get this wrong, but I believe it is in chapter 11 that he finds the golden ticket. And Roald Dahl spins out the tension, and Charlie Bucket, is just stuck in his horrible little hovel with his parents and grandparents for that long before he finds the golden ticket. I don't think you can get away with that nowadays. You have to move it ahead really fast, and so Kate does not have to wait until chapter 11 before her steam train arrives. She gets it in chapter 1, which means that you have to do a whole lot of characterization even before that happens. So you get half a chapter to build your world and set up your major characters, and then you have to put the pedal to the metal. I found that challenging, and it took a lot of work and workshopping to get it right, and I still don't know if I got it right, but that was the challenge.
Awesome. Okay. Looks like we have a few more in here. Let's see. I love the Grace Hopper question. This book is a call to action for climate change and endangered species. Do you think Kate will be the next climate change scientist, and will there be more as we follow her? Also, Carolyn from our children's department wanted me to let you know that your book is a finalist actually for our mock Newbery list. So,
wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. So what do you think about Kate? Will she turn into a climate change scientist?
It's a good question. It's interesting because I was writing the pitch, as we call it, for the next Silver Arrow book today, and I showed it to my agent today. And Kate is in the next book. I'm breaking news here. Kate will be a year older, and I decided that Kate should get a year older each time. So we will see if she gets up to gets old enough so that we know where she is heading. But it's hard to see her heading anywhere else. Maybe she won't be a scientist. I like the idea of her as a politician, as a policymaker. I think she is enjoying at times a little too much the feeling of being in charge. So I wonder if she doesn't go down that route. But it's definitely, it's part of how she sees the world. And it's interesting because I didn't at all set out to write a climate change book or a political book. I found that once the kids started talking to animals, you couldn't get away from it. And that is just, and it's not because I wanted to write a political screed. It just turns out to be what's happening in the world today to animals and to children. And they're after a certain point, the book couldn't be about anything else. So yes, I think that Kate is definitely heading in that direction. And whether it's the science side or more the politics side, it's hard to say. Tom, it's harder to tell, but I think we'll learn more about what's happening with him in the next book. I feel like he didn't get a lot of airtime in this book. Kate is, overwhelmingly the hero. I think maybe he'll sort of get a little more attention in the next book.
That's good to hear. Let's see. Kind of along the same question about will there be a sequel is Uncle Herbert is said to have magic in this book. Will we ever get more of a backstory on him?
I think that's very important, actually. When Uncle Herbert turns up, and we learn early on that he is in the magical world, and for some reason, I found it very funny that Uncle Herbert was a wizard, but then he didn't turn out to be the hero of the book at all. He's a wizard, and he just, but that's just by the by, he's a wizard, as if by the by he's a stockbroker or a janitor or something else. That's his job. He's a wizard. But he is not, the main event. That said, there's obviously a lot going on with magic in this world. And there are people who know about it and people who don't. And there's obviously this very magical railway that runs all through the world. And somebody is setting that up and running it and making sure that the trains run on time. And I think it will be, I hope, a very interesting surprise when we find out who's behind all that.
Sounds awesome. Okay, we've got two more. Let's start with Naya, who shared with us all that she has not read the book yet, but after hearing you speak about it, she's very excited to get her copy and take a read. So that's awesome to hear. And then she also was wondering, do you prefer writing for children or for adults?
It's funny. I had never written for children before I wrote this book, and I will say, and I mentioned this earlier, nobody reads like children, and I remember this from my own life, and I see it in my own children. Nobody I don't know if we can enter into fictional worlds the way that children do once we become adults, because we become too kind of self-conscious and cool, and we have to think about our quarterly estimated taxes and things like that. But when I watch my children read, everything is interesting to them, and everything is real to them. When they fall in love with the story, they fall in love with it all the way, and it's so gratifying to write for that audience, and challenging, but also it's truly wonderful. And then at the same time, like most writers, I sort of keep a thing going, a couple of things going at the same time. And I think that, I'm not a child myself, and I need to write sometimes about my own life. So I think that I'm going to balance it. I'm going to balance it. I wrote a movie that was shot earlier this year, right before the pandemic shut everything down. And that was about teenagers. So I feel like I'm slowly working my way through the various age groups. And pretty soon I'm going to write a book for people 80 and over, and that's it.
A lot of comments I could make about that. Okay. Last question, unless anybody has anything else, get them in now if you want a question answered. Otherwise, this will be our last one. How did you arrive at the Silver Arrow as the name of the train or the title of your book? Were there any other contenders?
This is a question that it pricks my vanity, because I used to consider myself somebody who was very good at naming books. And once I named a book, that was the name. And I never shilly-shallied around with different titles. I remember thinking of the name The Magicians and thought, yep, that's good. And then the other Magicians books, I thought of it very early on, and it never changed. But this book, I went through a lot of names for the train, because trains just have just incredibly wonderful names. And you can read through on the internet. There's so many names of different trains, and like the Silver Comet and things like that. There's a train in this book called the Twilight Star, and for a long time the book was called the Twilight Star, until my children told me that was stupid, and so I changed it. And we got to the Silver Arrow, but we went through a lot of different names and a lot of different titles before we arrived there. And the Silver Arrow stuck, even though my children lobbied heavily for the Copper Comet. But we didn't have the Copper Comet. Fortunately, in the next book, the lens will widen a bit, and we will see a lot more different trains. We'll get more of a look at the kind of whole train system. And so I can use a lot of those fun train names that I made up and never had a chance to use.
Are you going to put the Copper Comet in there for your kids?
I really think I should. The book is not going to be called The Copper Comet. But the Copper Comet will live, and it will ride the rails in the new book, somewhere in there.
When I say it in there, it'll make me smile now. Okay, well, I think that is it. Whoops, one more just came in. We've got a couple seconds, if you don't mind. This is a great one, actually. Will you further explore, this is from Brenda, Kate's relationship with her parents and what they think about the train that is in their backyard?
I really think that I should. I think I owe it to Kate, and I definitely owe it to her parents. When I started in my early drafts of the book, the parents were real monsters. I felt as though, and I was kind of trying to follow the Roald Dahl kind of formula there, where the parents tend to be either dead or really saintly or just unbelievably awful, like you can't even conceive of it. And I went down the awful road, and I thought they should be saints or they should be awful. Let's make them awful, because it's more fun. But over time, they sort of humanized a little bit, maybe because I'm a parent and I just couldn't do that to my proxy self in the book. But I felt like, more than anything else, one of the things that Kate should gain when she finishes her journey, I think she ought to come home and she ought to be able to look at her parents. And her parents, I think, become a little more human to her. She understands she's gotten a glimpse of the adult world, which turns out to be a more complicated world than she expected, and in some ways a darker world. And when she returns, having seen that, she's able to have more empathy for her parents and see them as a little bit more complicated people with their own struggles and their own challenges. And I think that that's somewhere that we should go deeper on in the next book. And so I think that that's something we're gonna look into.
Great. That sounds great. I think that's one of my, I love that in children's literature when they explore like the whole concept of parents really being human beings, like flawed human beings with complicated lives, like just instead of just mommy or daddy on a pedestal. So
I feel like it's one of the challenges of kids to see their parents as humans. I one day hope to see my own parents as human beings. It's going to happen any day now, and it's something I hope for Kate as well.
Well, that is great. Oh, somebody did ask, do you have a King Arthur book update? And that'll be our last question before we go.
Oh, I'm so... I've been working on a book about King Arthur I've been working on a lot of stuff. My last book before this was in 2014. It was 6 years ago. And I've been working on a lot of different stuff. And one of them is a book about King Arthur, which I struggled with a lot. And I feel like I've only now grasped how it should go. I've written the whole thing. It's just not very good. And I think I now realize King Arthur, he's such a complicated figure, and he is personally tragic, but he has a whole life as a king, as a political figure. So you sort of have to you have to see him as a king, and you see this whole, almost imperial level story is unfolding about Britain and what's happening there. And then you also have this very personal story, and it's very challenging to blend the two of them. And King Arthur, he's a father, but he's also a son. It's a very complicated story, and it's taken me a long time to get my head around. I feel confident that I get it now. Part of the challenge has been having small children during the pandemic, because I truly love to write maybe 6 hours every day, and I get to write maybe 2 hours every day, because the rest of it is me hanging out with my kids, because there just isn't very much childcare these days. Mm-hmm. So that's been a big challenge, but I really hope to turn it in by the end of the year. And if I do that, there is a chance that it could come out next year.
That's great. I think every parent in here can feel what you just said in their bones. So it is definitely a challenging time. I can't imagine needing time to sneak off and write. That would be very difficult right now. But so we'll look for it or you're going to turn it in towards the end of the year. So we'll look for an update maybe towards the end of the year.
Yes, definitely an update.
Fantastic. All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for all of us. I know there's some on here that need to actually get going and go to bed because you have school in the morning. And I also know that we had quite a few educators that joined us. I forgot to mention that earlier. To you, I say Godspeed, because you guys are doing an amazing job. I saw a meme that was like, educators are building the plane while they fly it. And I think that is, as a parent, that is spot on. So thank you. And thank you for being willing to be here, even though you're probably totally zoomed out after a whole day. So thank you to everybody for coming. You have no idea how much your support means to us. Anderson's is a small family-owned business, and every single customer, every single purchase is personal to us. And we greatly appreciate you being here tonight. And again, if you have any feedback that can help us as we continue to build this virtual events program, just go ahead and shoot me an email. That is my email right up there. And I'd really love to hear from you.